the question I want to answer is, how do we know, when I open my English Bible, written in English, that it's a faithful copy of a Greek manuscript from 2,000 years ago? How can we be certain of that? Well, even in the last 100 years, archaeology in the Middle East is still making amazing discoveries. And in 1946, a shepherd boy in what is now present-day Israel discovered what we today call the Dead Sea Scrolls. And these scrolls are still being investigated and examined, but they date from the time of Jesus. So they give us a colour, a flavour of what life was like then. What were this particular group of Jews thinking? But in addition to that was a scroll of Isaiah. Now that was an incredible discovery. Every archaeologist, theologian, Greek speaker wanted to have a look at this parchment on papyrus and see, is it a faithful representation of the earliest that they had before that? Now, the earliest scroll of Isaiah that they had before that was 1100 years later. And they discovered that almost word for word, they were exactly the same thing. Now that tells us something very exciting. It tells us that the scribes, the people in antiquity were extremely faithful and very diligent in copying these Greek texts. Now we know that, so that's one reason that we hold and are pretty certain that the texts that we have are an exact representation of what Peter, what Paul, what Matthew, Mark and Luke actually wrote. Now secondly, we also have things from antiquity. So for example, let me give you a couple of examples of letters that we do have. We have Caesar's Gallic Wars. That was written in 58 BC. The earliest copy that we have of Caesar's Gallic Wars is 700 years later, yet we don't doubt the veracity or truthfulness of what we're reading. Another example is Aristotle. We have papyrus fragments from Aristotle. Aristotle was writing in about 322 BC. The earliest papyrus fragment, if you like, the earliest writings of Aristotle that we have are 1100 years later, yet we don't doubt Aristotle. From the time of Jesus himself, a writing around 115, 116 AD. We have a Roman historian called Tacitus. Some of you may have heard of him, I don't know, but he documents the history of and includes early Christians during the Neronian persecution. They were tortured, all this sort of thing. The earliest parchment that we have recording Tacitus is again 700 years later. So of course the question is, with the early documents, the Christian documents, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, what do we have from them? Well, the earliest is actually at John Ryland's library in Manchester. It's from 115 AD, a parchment from one of the Gospels. We also have over 5,300 attested documents, parchment documents from the Gospels and Paul's letters from that time period. In contrast to almost anything else from antiquity, there is nothing to compare the amount of detailed parchments from that time period. We also have in excess of 50,000 part of parchments in sealed boxes. Now, that, I hope, goes some way to answering the question, can we believe in their truthfulness? Have they been passed on faithfully? And I believe the answers to both of those questions is a resounding yes.